And they want so much for Kevin Durant. A haul of picks, more than Utah got with Rudy Gobert, which was 5 first-round picks. They want a young star and maybe another young star. The chances are that KD and Kyrie are in Brooklyn next season.
We've been waiting for a Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving trade update for quite some time now. We've been hearing so much information about these two, whether it comes to the teams that they want to be traded to the most or what it's going to take in order to get these players. And now it seems like things are beginning to stabilize. We're starting to see a little bit more clearly what the end result is going to be based upon the moves that the Brooklyn Nets have made and based upon the results of trade discussions between the Brooklyn Nets and other teams. So before we get to the content, man, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. If you want to see shorter versions of this content, well, we upload shorts onto my TikTok page at TheFlightMike and onto my Instagram page, which is also called at TheFlightMike. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro.
Is there a path here, Woj, where we could see Kevin Durant return to Brooklyn?
Absolutely, especially if this drags out and if there's not a deal found here in the next month and it goes into August and you get closer to training camp, Brooklyn, they don't have to take a deal that they don't want to do. They don't have to talk themselves into a deal.
Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? So the last time we discussed the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving trade, there was something very interesting that was floated out there. First, we thought that the Golden State Warriors were actually interested in trading for Kevin Durant. This was a rumor that was put out there by Mark Spears, but it was debunked very easily. One, because, well, I don't see the Golden State Warriors giving up their entire future for Kevin Durant, and two, because technically this trade can't happen. You could trade for Jonathan Kuminga, Jordan Poole, and James Wiseman, but technically you're not allowed to trade for Andrew Wiggins if you're the Brooklyn Nets. So that trade was completely debunked. I don't blame Mark Spears for omitting that important detail if any trade were to happen, because it's the first time I heard of the designated rookie rule getting in the way of a huge trade for a player like Kevin Durant, and we talked about it more in depth in my Ben Simmons video. But at this point, the Brooklyn Nets have been in touch with half of the teams in the NBA. There's been so many teams that have been interested in trading for Kevin Durant, and hell, Kyrie Irving didn't really have as much of a market. It seems like only the Los Angeles Lakers are interested in trading for Kyrie Irving. So you might be thinking, Mike, we're 6 days into free agency. And I typically say, like, if a player is going to be traded, it's going to be at the very beginning of free agency. So those teams would know what their future is going to look like following these trades. But the fact that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving haven't been traded yet means that there is a chance that they don't get traded at all. Look, I'm sure the Brooklyn Nets understood when they first got themselves into the business of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and despite them playing hardball with Kyrie Irving because they didn't want to give him a huge contract extension, they knew that there were going to be moments like this. That's what I'm assuming. They knew that they were very overly emotional and somewhat sensitive, especially Kevin Durant, somewhat sensitive stars that are very competitive and want to win, but they could be a little bit impulsive with their emotions, and sometimes they could make trade requests or try to leave the situation they're in if they feel like they've been wronged by the front office. In the front office's case, I understand why they didn't want to extend Kyrie Irving. It makes a lot of sense. The man's literally played less games for them in 3 years than he played for the Boston Celtics in 2 years. He barely played any basketball at all. That doesn't warrant a max contract extension. And ultimately, the Nets got what they wanted out of Kyrie. He opted into his contract, and now he's locked into Brooklyn for at least one more season. Kevin Durant's hands are also kind of tied. Look, a lot of times we kind of get lost in the sauce in the media. We think just because a star player demands a trade, he is going to get traded. But here's the problem. Right now, the Brooklyn Nets are expecting so many freaking assets for a player like Kevin Durant's caliber. And I could kind of understand it, because Kevin Durant's name, when you think of Kevin Durant, it's like you think of his Hall of Fame resume, you think about how he's a transcendent scorer in the NBA and a matchup nightmare at literally every single position. But the problem is that the Brooklyn Nets sat back and saw DeJounte Murray get traded for a ridiculous ridiculous return from the Atlanta Hawks. Then they sat back and saw Rudy Gobert getting traded at the age of 30 for an absurd return from the Minnesota Timberwolves. And they're thinking to themselves, well, we have Kevin Durant, so we should probably be getting something crazier than that. So as I continue my research in regards to the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving situation with the Brooklyn Nets, I realized that there's a lot of density to both of these sides. I mean, Kevin Durant's situation and Kyrie Irving's situation before were very intermingled with one another, and there were very brief updates that I would bring you guys on both of them, and I would combine them into one video. That isn't necessarily the case anymore. I mean, what we're gonna do here, and I'm gonna try to get you guys both updates in this video, but if I don't, expect a separate video on the Kyrie Irving situation, because that's kind of intertwined with what the Los Angeles Lakers plans are, but I'm gonna do my absolute best. I don't want this to turn into a 25-minute video though. So here's what we know so far. According to Brian Windhorst, who has been having the best offseason that I've ever seen any insider have in quite some time, there's a brand new meme that was made based on him. The New Orleans Pelicans and the Brooklyn Nets have had very preliminary trade discussions. Now, bear in mind, there are 3 teams that could really give a nice package for Kevin Durant, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will. One being the New Orleans Pelicans. They have the most assets that they could give up for Kevin Durant, and Kevin Durant could still be on a contender. I mean, you build a trade package around Brandon Ingram and some future first-round picks, which, by the way, the Pelicans have a ton of future first-round picks as a result of the Anthony Davis trade. Kevin Durant would still go to a team where, without a doubt, they would be elevated to contender status, and in return, the Brooklyn Nets get Brandon Ingram, which is a great player to build around. At this point, Brian Windhorst even said that he assumes there have been talks, but both said it would be probably at this point very preliminary, and he doesn't know what they're offering. The assumption is going to be Brandon Ingram, man, because you can't build a trade package around CJ McCollum. Now, here's the thing. Despite Kevin Durant wanting to be traded, very important to know, the Brooklyn Nets are asking for an obscene return from whatever team that's trading for Kevin Durant. And I don't know what team would be willing to give such a return other than a team like the Pelicans, who are one of the few teams in the NBA that could trade for KD and then get elevated to contender status. Not a lot of teams are in that situation. There have been teams that have offered multiple first-round picks in the future, very similarly to the Rudy Gobert trade, and then would get turned down. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is I don't want you guys to discount the fact that the Brooklyn Nets appear to be planning to keep KD and Kyrie. The reason I'm saying this is just look at the moves that they've made this offseason. I mean, a few minutes before Kevin Durant made his trade request to the Brooklyn Nets, the Nets gave up a future first-round pick to acquire Royce O'Neal, a phenomenal two-way forward that any contender would be lucky to have on their team. The very definition of a 3-and-D player. And Donovan Mitchell isn't very happy about this. Now, we're gonna make another video on the Donovan Mitchell situation because that's a whole rabbit hole that we need to get into as well. But I want you guys to know, man, I don't think this is a scenario where Kevin Durant is going to be given up unless an offer is made for him that the Brooklyn Nets can't refuse. And again, that's kind of what the problem is, because if you ask me, I do think the trade for Rudy Gobert was an overpay by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Although it's an overpay, I give the Minnesota Timberwolves props for just going for it. They were just probably really sick of not being a contending team. This was their way of saying, hey, we're serious about contending. So more power to them. But also when you look at the DeJounte Murray trade as well, it's inflated Kevin Durant's value, despite being a 34-year-old Hall of Famer who's still really freaking good, by the way, that is coming off of an Achilles tear. Signing players like TJ Warren and trading a future first-round pick is indicating to your entire fan base that you are not planning on rebuilding at all whatsoever. You're trying to contend still. So it's very important that we keep that in mind, but just because that's the case doesn't necessarily mean that Kevin Durant is done flirting with other franchises. For those of you guys that don't know, Chet Holmgren made his debut in the NBA Summer League, and honestly, he performed very well. Ironically, he's getting compared to Kevin Durant, and there's a lot of similarities in one, their game, but two, the fact that they were drafted number 2 overall by the OKC Thunder. Back then when Kevin Durant was drafted, it was the Seattle Sonics, but you get what I'm saying. Kevin Durant knew that if he did this, he would send the entire NBA Twitter space into a frenzy as KD tweeted out, "I see you cooking, Seven. First day on the job was a success. I love the kicks," at Chet Holmgren. Now, at the same time, I wonder if Chet Holmgren did this on purpose. I mean, his jersey number is number 7, which is Kevin Durant's current jersey number with the Brooklyn Nets. But on top of that, he's literally wearing KD's. And it's obvious why this sent everyone into a frenzy, because Kevin Durant was drafted by the OKC Thunder before famously leaving after blowing a 3-1 series lead in the 2016 Western Conference Finals to the Golden State Warriors, before the Golden State Warriors blew a 3-1 series lead to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and Kevin Durant would then go and sign with a 73-win team. This definitely rubbed OKC Thunder fans the wrong way, but come on, at this point, I'm sure Kevin Durant looked at what LeBron James did for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I'm sure this is causing the wheels in his head to turn a little bit. What's the team that has the most assets in the entire NBA that's notorious for hoarding first-round draft picks just for the sake of hoarding first-round draft picks? The OKC Thunder. Now, I don't know if this will elevate the team to instant contender status. I don't know if this is something that they would be interested in pulling off. Personally, I'm going to tell you my prediction. I don't think any team trades for Kevin Durant. I think Kevin Durant is going to continue his career as a member of the Brooklyn Nets, primarily because I don't know if there's any team that would give up 6 future unprotected first-round draft picks and a superstar to get back Kevin Durant, who's in his age 34 season and 2 years removed from an Achilles tear, which again, still a fantastic player, but you don't know what his longevity is going to look like for the rest of his career. At this point, I think it's time for us to acknowledge that it might just be way too hefty of a price to acquire Kevin Durant. According to Jake Fisher, the Brooklyn Nets wanted Devin Booker in a package for Kevin Durant, and they weren't inclined to take a sign and trade that brought back restricted free agent DeAndre Ayton. And let's forget the fact that Devin Booker theoretically can't be traded to a team that Ben Simmons is on because of the designated rookie contract rule that we showed you at the beginning of this video. But at the same time, another general manager told Jake Fisher that DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and 5 picks still isn't enough to me for Kevin Durant, which I guess is just a completely different philosophy than what I have. Maybe the value of Kevin Durant is way too much for someone that would be willing to pay for him. At the same time, Shams Charania mentioned that Kevin Durant's desire was to play alongside Devin Booker and Chris Paul in Phoenix, and according to The Athletic's Sam Amick, Kevin Durant would only want to play in Miami if he could play alongside Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Kyle Lowry. What about the Toronto Raptors? They have a plethora of assets, and although that might be true, Jake Fisher mentioned that the franchise is unwilling to include this past year's Rookie of the Year, number 4 overall pick Scottie Barnes in any trade package for Kevin Durant. And in this video earlier, we mentioned that the Brooklyn Nets want one of the biggest trade returns in league history in exchange for Durant, which comes as little surprise as he's under contract for 4 more seasons. So any team that is going to want him is going to have to be willing to part with some significant assets. They want high-level players, perhaps an all-star, and then more players. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because currently stars are reaching out to Kevin Durant to potentially try to recruit him. This is very normal and commonplace in today's NBA. But apparently, according to Chris B. Haynes, which is one of my favorite rising star insiders in the game, various stars have attempted to get in touch with Kevin Durant to try to get a sense of what he's thinking. But Kevin Durant has gone dark and isn't speaking with anyone who's outside his quote-unquote inner circle. At this point, I think it's time for us to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Kevin Durant might be trapped in Brooklyn. There's not going to be a team that is going to be willing to part with the assets that is required to acquire Kevin Durant at this point. I mean, look, I think if there is a team that could do it, it's probably the OKC Thunder. Maybe one of these other teams ends up budging and giving the Brooklyn Nets what they want for Durant, because at the end of the day, if the Miami Heat parted with Bam Adebayo for Kevin Durant, well, it's not like Kevin Durant could say, no, I don't want to play for the Miami Heat now that Bam Adebayo isn't there, because he's under contract for 4 more years. At the same time, if the Brooklyn Nets wanted to give KD the finger and make him play this season anyway, they could do that. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about this, man. Do you think Kevin Durant is going to stay a member of the Brooklyn Nets, or do you think Kevin Durant is probably going to end up on a different team? What team do you think is the most likely for that to happen? Do you think the OKC Thunder would be likely to trade for him? The New Orleans Pelicans? The Phoenix Suns? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.